The Battle of Krathis Prime began with fire and ended with silence. Admiral Park watched from the bridge of the Resolute dawn as her fleet engaged the Krath Armada. Hundreds of ships clashing in the void above the fortress world. Weapons fire lighting up the darkness like a second sun. The Krath fought with the desperation of a species facing extinction. Their largest warships were 3 times the size of anything the humans had brought. Massive dreadnoughts bristling with weapons that could crack planets. And they threw themselves at the human fleet with savage fury ships died on both sides. The destroyer Indomitable was torn apart by concentrated fire from a Krath battle group. A crew of 300 lost in an instant. The cruiser Bright Star lost power and drifted into a collision course with an enemy vessel and her captain. Ordered ramming speed rather than surrender, Admiral. Park felt each loss like a knife in her heart. But she did not waver. Push through, she ordered. We stop when they are broken. The human ships were smaller and faster and crewed by beings who had evolved for war. They danced between the lumbering Krath dreadnoughts and struck at weak points with surgical precision. One by one the enemy ships began to fall. After 6 hours of combat, the Krath fleet was shattered. The survivors fleeing into deep space, and the path to the planet was clear. Begin landing operations, Admiral Park said quietly. It is time to finish this on the surface of Krathis. Prime. The Krath had fortified their capital city with every weapon and soldier they had remaining. Determined to make the humans pay for every meter of ground, Sergeant Beek Su-jing led her squad through the landing zone under heavy fire. The sky dark with smoke and the ground shaking with explosions. They had been fighting for 2 days straight. Sergeant Private Yoon shouted over the noise. The Citadel is 3 blocks ahead. Intelligence says the High Dominarch is inside. Then that is where we are going. They pushed forward through streets that had become killing grounds. Krath soldiers emerging from every building and alley to throw themselves at the human advance. Beak had lost count of how many she had killed. She had lost count of how many friends she had buried. Corporal No took a shot to the shoulder and kept fighting. Her face pale but her aim steady. Staff Sergeant Im ran out of ammunition and picked up a Krath blade and used it to cut a path through the enemy lines. They reached the Citadel gates just as a Krath counterattack slammed into their position. Hold the line, Beak screamed. We did not come this far to fail now. The battle became a blur of violence and desperation. Humans and Krath fighting hand to hand in the shadow of the enemy's greatest fortress. Then Lieutenant Commander Kang arrived with reinforcements, and the tide turned. The gates fell. Inside the Citadel was a maze of corridors and chambers designed to confuse and trap invaders, but the humans did not slow down. They moved through the complex like a force of nature. Unstoppable and utterly without mercy. Beak found the High Dominarch's throne room at the heart of the structure. Akrathevis sat on a massive chair made of bones. The trophies of 1,000 conquered species, and around him stood his personal guard. The largest and most dangerous warriors the Dominion had ever produced. So you are the human who killed Overseer Vrax, the High Dominarch said, his voice rumbling like thunder. I have heard stories about you. The female who fights like a demon. I have heard stories about you too, Beak replied. They say you personally ordered the attack on the Valkyrie. They say you watched the footage of the massacres and laughed. I did. They were weak, and weakness deserves to be purged from the galaxy. And what do you think you deserve? The Dominarch rose from his throne, and his guards moved to attack. Beak met them head-on. The fight was brutal and savage, and everything she had been training for her entire life. She killed the first guard with a shot to the head, and the second with a knife to the throat, and the third with her bare hands. When her weapons were knocked away, her squad fought beside her and around her, and when the last guard fell, only the Dominarch remained. He was enormous, towering over her like a mountain of muscle and armor. And when he swung his massive fist, she barely dodged in time. "You cannot defeat me, human," he snarled. "I have killed thousands with these hands. Then let me be the last." She attacked. The fight lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours, Beak pushing her body beyond its limits, taking hits that should have killed her, and somehow staying on her feet. The Dominarch was strong, but he was slow and arrogant, convinced of his own invincibility. And that arrogance was his undoing. Beak feinted left and rolled right and came up behind him with her knife in hand, drove the blade into the gap between his neck plates and twisted the high Dominarch. Fell. He was not dead, not yet. And Beak stood over him with her weapon ready to finish what she had started. "Why?" he gasped, black blood pooling beneath him. "Why would you die for them? The Valkyrie are nothing, weak, worthless. What do they matter to you?" Beak thought about Tyrell, who had overcome his fear to save a stranger. She thought about the Valkyrie children she had carried from burning buildings. She thought about every innocent life the Krath had destroyed. "Because that is what makes us human," she said. "We protect the weak. We stand up for those who cannot stand for themselves. We do not calculate the value of lives. We simply act." She lowered her knife. "But we are not monsters. You will face justice, real justice. Not vengeance, but accountability." Admiral Park's voice came over the comm. "Sergeant Beak, this is Admiral Park. We have received word that the remaining Krath forces are surrendering across all fronts. The war is over." Beak felt something loosen in her chest. A tension she had been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "Copy that, Admiral. The High Dominarch is in custody." 6 months later, the Galactic Council convened for the trial of the Krath. Leadership species from across the galaxy watched as the evidence was presented. Testimony from survivors, footage of atrocities, records of slave trades and genocide spanning 1,000 years. Ambassador Yaren Cho sat in the human delegation and listened as Serafel, the Valkyrie elder who had begged for help in this very chamber, addressed the assembly. "When the Krath came to our world, we had no one to turn to," Serafel said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "The galaxy watched our suffering and did nothing. They calculated costs and risks and decided we were not worth saving." He turned to look at the human delegation, but the humans came. They did not ask what we could offer them. They did not weigh our lives against their own. They simply came, and they fought, and they bled, and they died. For strangers. For people they had never met. He paused. The Krath believed that strength meant the ability to inflict suffering. That power was measured in conquest and domination. But the humans showed us a different kind of strength. The strength to protect, the strength to sacrifice, the strength to look at evil and say no more. The chamber was silent. The Dominion is gone. Its leaders will face justice. Its empire of cruelty has ended, but we must remember why. We must remember that it took a species forged on a world that never stopped trying to kill them. A species that understood violence better than anyone, to teach us all what true courage looks like. The trial concluded with guilty verdicts for every Krath leader. Their sentences ranging from life imprisonment to labor in rehabilitation programs designed to undo centuries of cultural brutality. The Dominion was formally dissolved on the rebuilt Valaris, where the first massacres had taken place. A memorial now stood in the central square. 2 figures carved from white stone, a human soldier and a Valkyrie child. Their hands joined. The names of the fallen were inscribed on the base. Human and Valkyrie together. Sergeant Beak Sujin stood before the memorial with Tyrell beside her. Her left arm, now a prosthetic replacement for the one she had lost in the final battle. Children played in the streets that had once been filled with bodies, their laughter carrying on the wind. "You could stay," Tyrell said. "Help us rebuild. There is so much work to do." Beak watched the children and felt something she had not felt in a long time. "Peace. For a while," she said. "Then there will be others who need help. There always are. She looked up at the sky where human ships still patrolled. Guardians now instead of warriors, and we will answer. We always do. Terrell followed her gaze. I think I understand now why humans are the way you are. Your world made you into survivors, into fighters. But you chose to become protectors. That choice is what makes you exceptional. Beak smiled. We are not exceptional, Terrell. We are just stubborn. Our ancestors refused to die when the universe tried to kill them, and we refuse to stand by when innocent people suffer. It is not nobility, it is just who we are. A Valkyrie. Child ran up to them and tugged on Beak's sleeve. Are you the human who saved us? She asked with wide, curious eyes. Beak knelt down to meet the child's gaze. A lot of humans saved you, and a lot of Valkyrie too, including this one right here. She gestured to Terrell, who looked embarrassed. The child considered this for a moment. Will you always protect us? Beak thought about her fallen friends and the battles yet to come, and the endless work of building a better galaxy. Yes, she said. As long as there are humans in the stars, we will protect those who need protecting. That is our promise. The child smiled and ran back to her friends, and Beak stood up and watched her go. The war was over, but the work of the Deathworlders was just beginning. News of Cirith Minor spread across the galaxy like wildfire. In every station and colony and homeworld, the story was the same. The humans had come and the Krath had fallen, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the Dominion knew what it felt like to lose on Station Meridian. The Galactic Council watched in disbelief as reports flooded in from the liberated colony. Footage of human soldiers carrying Valkyrie children to safety. Images of Krath prisoners being treated with a dignity they had never shown. Their own victim's ambassador Yaren Cho stood before the assembly and fielded questions from species who could not understand what they were seeing. Ambassador Cho, surely you intend to negotiate now, the Morvith delegate said nervously. The Krath will be willing to discuss terms after this defeat. There will be no negotiations, but they are offering to release the remaining Valkyrie prisoners. They are offering reparations and territorial concessions. Yaren's expression did not change. The Krath murdered 12 million people in 3 days. They burned cities and crushed eggs and sold children into slavery. And now that they have tasted defeat, they want to buy their way out of consequences. She shook her head slowly. That is not how humans do justice. You do not get to commit genocide and then write a check. Our fleet is not stopping until the Dominion is dismantled and every single Valkyrie is free. The council chamber erupted in chaos, but Yaren simply turned and walked out because there was nothing more to say. Far from Station Meridian, the human fleet was already moving to its next target. Admiral Park had divided her forces into 3 battle groups, each one assigned to liberate a cluster of Krath-controlled systems. And as each world fell, the legend of the Deathworlders grew on Vareth Prime. A slave uprising began when human dropships appeared in the sky. The enslaved workers, overwhelming their guards with improvised weapons and bare hands, because they knew help had finally arrived on the mining colony of Kresh 4. A single human company held a defensive line against 2,000 Krath soldiers for 18 hours until reinforcements arrived. Not one human retreated. Not one human surrendered on the fortress world of Malthex. A Krath commander tried to use civilian hostages as shields and discovered that humans were very good at precision shooting when innocent lives were on the line. The Dominion was cracking. Lieutenant Commander Kang Minho led a strike team deep into Krath territory with a mission that could not fail: the destruction of the enemy's cloning facilities. The Krath did not reproduce naturally like most species. They grew their soldiers in vats, engineering each one for size and aggression and obedience. And as long as those facilities existed, They could replace their losses indefinitely. Kang's team infiltrated the primary cloning complex on the moon of Raxus 7 and planted enough explosives to turn the entire structure into rubble. They were almost out when the alarm sounded. Move! Kang shouted as Krath's security forces converged on their position. Everyone to the extraction point now. They fought their way through corridors filled with enemies, each step purchased with blood and ammunition. And Kang thought they were going to make it until a blast door slammed down directly in front of him. Was alone on the wrong side with 5 Krath soldiers closing in. Commander. Sergeant Beak's voice crackled over the comm. We can override the door from this side, but it will take time. You do not have time. Complete the mission. I will hold them here. Commander, no. That is an order, Sergeant. Kang turned to face the approaching Krath and raised his rifle and made peace with death. The first Krath went down with a bullet in his throat, and the second took 3 shots to bring down, and then Kang was out of ammunition, and switching to his sidearm, he killed the third and wounded the fourth, but the fifth was too fast, knocking the pistol from his hand and lifting him off the ground by his neck. The Krath soldiers squeezed, and Kang felt his vision starting to go dark. Then there was a blur of green and gold feathers, and the Krath screamed and dropped him. Tyrell stood over the fallen soldier with a human combat knife clutched in his trembling hands and black blood staining his beautiful plumage. I did not know I could do that, Tyrell said in a voice that shook with shock. Kang stared at the Velkari liaison, who had been terrified of humans just weeks ago and who had just killed an enemy twice his size to save a stranger's life. How did you get here? I followed you. I told Sergeant Beak that I could help with the security systems, and she believed me. I think she knew I was lying, but she let me come anyway. The blast door opened, and Beak appeared with the rest of the team. Commander, we need to move. Detonation in 4 minutes. Kang let them pull him to his feet, and they ran. The explosion lit up the night sky of Raxus 7, and somewhere in the Dominion's command structure, someone realized that the humans were not just defending. They were hunting. On the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, Admiral Park received the confirmation that the cloning facilities were destroyed and allowed herself a rare smile. Ma'am, Commander Wang said, we are receiving a transmission from the Krath High Dominarch. Put it through. The holographic display flickered to life and showed a Krath so large and so heavily decorated that he could only be the supreme leader of the Dominion. I am High Dominarch Krathvex, the creature rumbled, and I am offering you a chance to end this war before more of your people die. I am listening. We will release all Velkari prisoners immediately. We will pay whatever reparations you demand. We will cede the disputed territories. All we ask is that you withdraw your forces and leave Dominion space. Admiral Park studied the alien's face and saw something she had never expected to see in a Krathfer. High Dominarch, she said slowly. Do you know why humans evolved forward-facing eyes? The Krath blinked in confusion. It is because we are predators. Our ancestors hunted prey across the savannas of our homeworld, and we developed depth perception so we could judge distance and time our strikes perfectly. She leaned forward. We also developed something else. Something that prey species like the Velkari never needed. We developed persistence, the ability to chase our prey for days without stopping, to wear them down until they could not run anymore. Her voice hardened. You do not get to buy your way out of genocide. You do not get to offer concessions and pretend the last 1,000 years did not happen. You started this war when you attacked a peaceful species who had never done you any harm, and we are going to finish it. She cut the transmission and turned to her crew. Set course for Krathus Prime. It is time to end this. The fleet moved through hyperspace toward the heart of the Dominion, and in the troop base soldiers prepared for the final Battle Sergeant Beak found Tyrell sitting alone in the observation deck, staring at his hands. "You saved Commander Kang's life," she said, sitting down beside him. "I killed someone," Tyrell replied without looking up. "My people do not kill. We have never killed. We create and nurture and protect, but we do not take lives." And now, he finally turned to look at her, and she saw that his eyes were different. Harder somehow, the innocence burned away by fire. "Now I understand why you do it. I understand that sometimes violence is the only answer. I hate that I understand, but I cannot unlearn it." Beak put her hand on his shoulder. "The universe is not fair, Tyrell. It rewards cruelty and punishes kindness, and the only way to change that is to stand up and fight back. You did what you had to do to save a life. Does it ever get easier? No. But it does get clearer. You learn to accept that some evils cannot be reasoned with. They can only be stopped." Tyrell was quiet for a long moment. "The Valkyrie will need protectors after this is over. People who understand both peace and war. Perhaps that can be my purpose now." Beak smiled. "That sounds like a good purpose." The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, and through the observation window, they could see Krathus Prime, the fortress world at the center of the Dominion, bristling with defenses and surrounded by the largest fleet the Krath had ever assembled. "All hands," Admiral Park's voice echoed through the ship. "The enemy is before us. Their world has never fallen. Their armies have never been defeated." She paused. "But they have never fought humans. Today we show them what Deathworlders can do. Today we end their empire of cruelty. Today we deliver vengeance for every innocent soul they have destroyed." The fleet surged forward. "For the Valkyrie," Admiral Park said. "And for everyone the Krath will never hurt again." The Krath fleet was not expecting visitors when the human ships materialized from hyperspace above the Valkyrie. "Colony world of Cirith Minor," the Krath commander broadcast. A warning on all frequencies demanding that the unknown vessels identify themselves and withdraw immediately. Admiral Park Jesu listened to the transmission and said nothing. "Admiral," Commander Wang said, "they are demanding a response. Let them demand." She watched the tactical display as the Krath warships began moving into a defensive formation. Their vessels large and heavily armored and bristling with weapons designed to intimidate lesser species into surrender. The Krath had never needed sophisticated tactics because they had never faced an enemy that could challenge them. They simply overwhelmed opposition with size and firepower and brutality. That was about to change. "All ships," Admiral Park said calmly. "Weapons free." The human fleet opened fire. The Resolute Dawn launched a swarm of missiles that streaked across the void like angry stars and slammed into the nearest Krath cruiser. The explosions bloomed against the enemy shields, and for a moment it seemed like the attack had failed. Then the shields collapsed, and the second wave of missiles punched through the hull, and the cruiser broke apart in a spray of metal and fire. The Krath commander screamed orders over the communication channels, and his fleet surged forward to engage, but they were too slow. They had been built for intimidation, not speed, and the human ships danced around them like wolves around a herd of cattle. "Target their engines," Admiral Park ordered. "I want them dead in space before they can regroup." The battle lasted 43 minutes. When it was over, 17 Krath warships were destroyed, and another 12 were disabled and drifting, and the human fleet had lost only 2 destroyers. Admiral Park allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction before turning to the real mission. Commander Wang began landing operations. "I want boots on the ground within the hour." On the surface of Cirith Minor, the Krath occupation force had turned the Valkyrie city into a processing center for slaves. Sergeant Beak Sujin led her squad through the burning streets. and tried not to look too closely at the bodies scattered everywhere. Because if she looked too closely, she would lose the cold focus. She needed to do her job. The Krath had been thorough in there. Cruelty, movement ahead. Corporal, no reported. Looks like a slave convoy. 20 Krath guards plus transport vehicles. Sujin raised her hand and her squad stopped and took cover behind the ruins of what had once been a school. She peered around the corner and saw the convoy moving slowly down the main street. The transport vehicles were open-topped and filled with Valkyrie civilians huddled together in terror. And the Krath guards walked alongside with weapons drawn and expressions of bored contempt. We hit them fast and hard, Sujin said quietly. Priority is protecting the civilians. Taiwu, you take the guards on the left. Yunji, you have the right. Hajin, you are with me on the transports. What about the odds? Private Yun asked. 20-4 is not great. Sujin smiled grimly. Then it is almost fair. She counted down from 3, and then burst from cover with her rifle already. Firing, the first Krath guard went down before he even knew he was under attack. The bullet finding the gap between his neck plates and dropping him instantly. The other guards spun toward the threat and raised their weapons, but they were too slow. Their massive armored bodies designed for power, not agility. And the humans were already among them. Sujin ducked under a Krath soldier's sweeping arm and put 3 rounds into his side where the armor was thinnest. He roared in pain and tried to grab her, but she was already moving. Rolling past him and coming up behind another guard, Staff Sergeant M's rifle cracked twice and 2 more. Krath fell with holes in their heads. Corporal No fought in silence, as she always did. Her movements precise and economical. Each shot placed exactly where it needed to be. Private Yun was struggling with a Krath, who had gotten too close, and Sujin sprinted to help. Leaping onto the creature's back and driving her combat knife into the base of his skull, he collapsed, and Yun scrambled free with wide, terrified eyes. Keep moving, Sujin ordered. We are not done. The remaining Krath guards tried to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. The humans were everywhere at once, appearing from shadows and striking from angles that should have been impossible. In less than 2 minutes, all 20 guards were dead. Sujin climbed onto one of the transport vehicles and looked down at the Valkyrie civilians who stared up at her with expressions caught between hope and terror. You are safe now, she said in the simple trade language that most species understood. We are humans and we are here to help. A Valkyrie elder pushed forward through the crowd. The processing center, she said urgently. There are thousands more being held at the processing center. The Krath commander is there. He calls himself Overseer of Rax, where the elder pointed toward a large building at the center of the city. Smoke rising from its rooftops. He is evil even by Krath standards. He enjoys the suffering. Please, you must stop him. Sujin nodded and jumped down from the transport. Taiwu, stay here and protect the civilians. Everyone else with me. They moved through the city like ghosts, staying to the shadows and avoiding the Krath patrols that were now scrambling in confusion as reports of the human attack spread. Processing Center had once been a Valkyrie government building, a beautiful structure of glass and flowing curves that the Krath had turned into a house of horror. Sujin could hear the screaming from a block away. They breached the main entrance and found themselves in a large hall filled with Valkyrie prisoners being sorted by age and health. The young and strong pushed toward the slave ships. The old and sick pushed toward a door marked with symbols that Sujin did not need to translate. The Krath guards inside reacted faster than the ones on the street, opening fire immediately and forcing the humans to take cover. Yunji flanked left. Sujin shouted over the roar of weapons fire. Hajin, cover me. She sprinted across the open floor, bullets striking the ground around her feet, and slid behind a concrete pillar, just as a Krath soldier charged at her with a blade. In each of his 4 hands, she shot him. twice in the chest and once in the head, and he went down. Ardmore Krath poured into the hall, and the battle became a nightmare of close-quarters combat. Humans and aliens fighting hand-to-hand among the screaming prisoners. Jean lost track of how many she killed. Then she saw him, Overseer. Vrax was enormous, even by Krath standards. His armor decorated with trophies taken from conquered species. And he stood on a raised platform at the far end of the hall with a Valkyrie child in his grip. "Humans," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the chaos. "I have heard of you. The Deathworlders who think they can challenge the Dominion." He lifted the child, and Sujin saw that she was barely old enough to have her adult feathers. Her eyes wide with terror. "Let me show you what we do to those who interfere with our business." He began to squeeze as Sujin did not think. She simply moved. She covered the distance to the platform in seconds, her legs pumping with desperate speed. And she hit Vrax like a missile. Just as the child slipped from his grasp, they went down together in a tangle of limbs, and she felt his claws rake across her armor, but she did not stop. Could not stop, the fury inside her burning. Too hot for pain, she got her knife free and drove it into his eye, and he screamed and thrashed and threw her across the room. She hit the wall hard enough to crack ribs, but she was already getting up, already moving. And when Vrax staggered to his feet with black blood pouring down his face, she was there to meet him. "You think you know violence," she said through gritted teeth. "You think you understand predators. But you have never met a human who has nothing left to lose." She shot him once in each knee, and he collapsed then. She stood over him and looked into his remaining eye and let him see exactly what he had awakened. "This is for everyone you have ever hurt." The shot echoed through the suddenly silent house. Sujin turned and found Corporal No holding the Valkyrie child, who was crying but alive. "Sergeant," No said quietly, "it is over." But Sujin knew it was not over. This was just one world and one overseer. The Krath Dominion was vast, and there were millions more. Valkyrie still in chains, a Valkyrie elder approached her with trembling steps. "The Krath took everything from us," she said. "What will you take from them?" Sujin looked at the bodies scattered across the floor, and the survivors clutching each other, and the child still sobbing in No's arms. "Everything," she said. "We will take everything." The corridors of the Resolute Dawn hummed with the energy of a ship preparing for war. Sergeant First Class Beak Sujin walked through the troop decks and watched her soldiers check their weapons and armor, and she felt the familiar weight of command settling onto her shoulders like an old coat. She had been fighting for 18 years, had seen combat on 7 worlds, had buried friends and enemies alike, and she had thought she understood what cruelty looked like. Then she watched the intelligence briefings about the Krath. The briefing room was packed with soldiers from the 77th Ground Assault Division, and the air was thick with tension as Lieutenant Commander Kang Minho stood before the main display screen. "Listen up, because I'm only going to explain this once," Kang said, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. "The Krath are not like any enemy you have faced before. They are big, they are armored, and they are mean." He pulled up an image of a Krath warrior, and several soldiers cursed under their breath. The creature stood nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 arms, ending in clawed hands, and a body covered in natural bone plating that could stop most small arms' fire. Its head was angular and predatory, with multiple eyes and a mouth full of teeth, designed for tearing flesh. "They evolved on a high-gravity world with a methane atmosphere," Kang continued, "which means they are stronger than us, and they can breathe in environments that would kill most species in minutes. They have been conquering and enslaving other races for over 1,000 years, and in all that time, they have never lost the ground." "War." A soldier near the front raised his hand. "Sir, what about their weaknesses?" Kang smiled grimly. They have two. First, they are slow. That armor and muscle mass cost them speed and agility. A trained human can outmaneuver them in close quarters. Second, they are arrogant. They have never faced a species that could match them in combat, and they believe they are invincible. He turned off the display and faced the room. We are going to prove them wrong. After the briefing, Sujin gathered her squad in a small storage bay that had become their unofficial meeting space, and she looked at the faces of the men and women who would follow. They're into hell. There was Private First Class Yoon, Hajin, who was barely 20 years old and still believed in heroes, and Corporal No Yoonji, who had lost her brother on Kepler Station and never smiled anymore, and Staff Sergeant Im Tae-woo, who was the best shot in the division and the worst card player. They were her family now. The only family that mattered. I know what you are thinking, Sujin said. You are thinking about those images of the Valkyrie, the burning cities and the mass graves and the slave ships. You are thinking about how something like that could happen while the rest of the galaxy just watched. She paused and took a breath. I want to tell you something that they do not teach in the recruitment videos. Humans used to do the same thing, not to aliens, but to each other. Our history is full of genocides and slave trades and conquered peoples. We are not innocent, and we never have been. The room was silent. But here's the difference between us and the Krath. We learned. We looked at what we had done, and we felt shame, and we swore never again. And when we see another species doing what our ancestors did, we do not look away. We do not calculate costs. We remember our own sins, and we act. She met each of their eyes in turn. That is why we fight. Not because we are better than the Krath, but because we know exactly what they are. We recognize the evil because it lives in our own history, and we will not let it continue. Private Yoon spoke up hesitantly. Sergeant, what if we fail? What if the Krath are too strong? Sujin smiled, and it was the smile of a woman who had made peace with death long ago. Then we die trying. But let me tell you something about Deathworlders, Private. Our ancestors survived ice ages and plagues and predators that would give the Krath nightmares. We are the descendants of the ones who refuse to quit. Giving up is not in our blood. The next day a shuttle arrived from the Valkyrie refugee fleet carrying a liaison officer who would provide tactical data and translation services. His name was Terrell, and he was young by Valkyrie standards, with bright green and gold feathers that should have been beautiful, but were dull and lifeless from stress and grief. Sujin met him at the shuttle bay and watched him step onto the deck and immediately freeze when he saw the human soldiers around him. She understood his fear too. Most galactic species humans were terrifying. They were too dense with muscle. Their eyes faced forward like predators. They moved with a fluid grace that spoke of millions of years of hunting and killing. Even standing still, they radiated an energy that made prey species want to run. Liaison Terrell, Sujin said gently. I am Sergeant Beak Sujin. I will be your escort during your time with us. Terrell swallowed visibly and forced himself to step forward. Thank you, Sergeant. I apologize for my reaction. I have never been this close to humans before. No need to apologize. We know what we look like to others. She led him through the ship, and he flinched every time a human passed too close, and his small taloned feet clicked nervously. On the metal floors, they passed the training room where soldiers were sparring hand to hand, and Terrell stopped to watch with wide, horrified eyes. Two humans were fighting with controlled brutality, their fists and feet connecting with impacts that echoed through the corridor. And when one of them was knocked down, he simply got back up and continued fighting as if nothing had happened. How can they do that? Terrell whispered. How can they hurt each other like that and just continue? Pain is our teacher, Sujin replied. Our world was always trying to kill us, so we had to become comfortable with suffering. What you see as brutality, we see as preparation. Terrell turned to look at her, and there was something new in his expression. Something that might have been the beginning of understanding. The stories say that humans will fight until their bodies physically cannot continue. That you will crawl toward your enemies with broken limbs and still try to kill them. Is that true? Sujin thought about all the battles she had survived, all the wounds she had taken, all the times she should have died but simply refused. Yes, she said. That is true. Terrell was quiet for a long moment. My people are pacifists, Sergeant. We have never had warriors. We create art and music and philosophy. We believed that the galaxy was civilized. Enough that violence was no longer necessary. His voice cracked. We were wrong, Sujin. Put a hand on his shoulder and felt him tense, but he did not pull away. You were not wrong to want peace, Terrell. You were just unlucky enough to meet a species that does not deserve it. That is why we are here. So that people like you can continue to make art and music without having to learn how to kill. Terrell looked up at her with tears in his large eyes. Why would you die for strangers, Sergeant Beak? It was the same question Ambassador Seraphil had asked, and Sujin gave the same answer, because it was the only answer that mattered. Because someone has to, and we are built for it. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, and the intercom crackled with Admiral Park's voice. All hands battle stations, we have arrived at Velkari space. May whatever gods you believe in have mercy on our enemies, because we will not. Sujin felt her heart begin to pound, and she smiled. The hunt was about to begin. Ambassador Yaren Cho had never seen the Galactic Council in chaos before. The Great Chamber on Station Meridian was designed to hold the representatives of 300 species in perfect order and dignity. But today there was no order and there was no dignity. Only screaming and crying and the terrible glow of holographic displays showing cities on fire. She pushed through the crowd of panicking delegates, her human bodyguards clearing a path with their broad shoulders, and made her way to the central platform where the emergency broadcast was playing on a screen 50 meters tall. The images made her stomach turn. Burning buildings collapsed onto streets filled with bodies. And the bodies were small and covered in feathers, and many of them were children. And the soldiers walking among the dead wore the black armor of the Krath Dominion. How long has this been happening? She demanded of the nearest council aide. The aide was a Morvith, a species that resembled upright salamanders, and his skin had gone pale with terror. 3 days, Ambassador Cho. The Krath invaded the Velkari homeworld 3 days ago, and we only just received the distress signal because they destroyed the communication relays first. 3-day Siren looked back at the screen and watched a Krath soldier grab a Velkari female by her wing and drag her toward a transport ship. And the female was screaming and reaching back towards something on the ground. And when the camera angle shifted, Yaren saw it was a nest of eggs that another soldier was crushing. Beneath his boots, she had to look away. Where is the Velkari representative? She asked. The aide pointed with a trembling hand toward a small figure huddled near the base of the main podium, surrounded by other delegates who were offering comfort but nothing else. Erin walked over, and the crowd parted for her because humans made other species nervous, even in the best of times. And these were not the best of times. The Velkari representative was an elder named Seraphil, and his blue and silver feathers were dull with grief, and his large eyes were wet with tears that would not stop falling. Ambassador Seraphil, Yaren said softly, kneeling down to meet his eyes. I am Ambassador Yaren Cho of the Human Confederacy. Please tell me what you need. Seraphil looked up at her, and for a moment he seemed unable to speak. But then he found his voice. The Krath came without warning. They said we had resources they wanted and people they could sell. And when our leaders refused to surrender, they began the killing. They are killing everyone, Ambassador Cho, everyone. The old and the young and the sick and the healthy. They are loading our people onto slave ships and burning everything else. His voice broke, and he covered his face with his delicate hands. We begged the council for help. We begged every species with a military fleet to intervene. But they all refused. They said the craft were too powerful. They said intervention would be too costly. They said they were sorry. He lowered his hands and looked at Yaren with something that might have been hope or might have been despair. But you are human. And humans are different. We have heard the stories about your kind. That you come from a world that kills. That you understand violence in ways other species cannot. That you fight not just to survive, but to protect. Please, Ambassador Cho, we have nothing to offer you. No resources and no technology and no strategic value. But we are dying and we are begging. Will you help us? Yaren felt something cold settle in her chest. Something that every human recognized. Something that had driven her ancestors to cross oceans and scale mountains and walk on. The moon, it was the feeling of being needed. She stood up and pulled out her communication device and opened a direct channel to Earth Command. This is Ambassador Yaren Cho. Requesting immediate connection to Fleet Admiral Park Jisoo. Priority 1. Authorization code Delta 77 Omega. The response came in seconds. Ambassador Cho, this is Admiral Park. I am watching the Council broadcast. What do you need? The 1st Expeditionary Fleet Admiral. I need it redirected to Valkyrie space immediately. Full combat readiness. There was a pause that lasted only a heartbeat. The fleet will be underway within the hour, Ambassador. We will make contact when we arrive. Park out. Yaren ended the call and looked down at Sirafel, who was staring at her with an expression she could not quite read. You did not ask your government for permission. He whispered, I did not need to. Yaren replied, when humans see innocent people being slaughtered, we do not form committees, and we do not debate costs, and we do not calculate strategic value. We act. That is who we are. Sirafel reached out and gripped her hand with his own. And his fingers were thin and fragile and warm. Why, he asked. Why would you die for us when we are strangers to you? Yaren thought about how to answer that question. Thought about all the history and philosophy and biology that had shaped humanity into what it was. And then she decided to keep it simple. Because someone has to, she said. And we are built for it. Across the chamber, the other council delegates had stopped. They're panicking and were watching the exchange with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief to something that looked almost like fear. The Morvith aide approached cautiously. Ambassador Cho, surely you do not intend to engage the Krath Dominion in direct military conflict. They have conquered 40 systems. They have never lost a war. Their ground forces are legendary. Yaren smiled, and it was not a warm smile. Then they have never fought humans. She turned and began walking toward the exit, her bodyguards falling into step beside her. And she could feel the eyes of 300 species on her back. Let them watch, she thought. Let them see what happens when Deathworlders go to war far away in the black void between stars. The human carrier Resolute Dawn changed course, and its escort fleet of cruisers and destroyers followed. And in the command center, Admiral Park Jisoo stood before a holographic display, showing the Valkyrie system and the Krath forces occupying it. She was a small woman with gray in her black hair and lines on her face that spoke of decades of service. And her eyes were dark and calm, and utterly without mercy. Intelligence report, she said. Her tactical officer, Commander Wang. They have pulled up the data. The Krath have deployed approximately 200 warships to the Valkyrie system, Admiral, plus ground forces estimated at 500,000 soldiers. They are using standard slaver tactics, which means securing population centers and transportation infrastructure before moving to resource extraction. Casualties among the Valkyrie. Unknown, Admiral, but the estimates suggest at least 12 million dead in the first 3 days, with more dying every hour. Admiral Park studied the display for a long moment. The Krath have never faced a human fleet in combat, she said quietly. They believe they are the apex predators of this galaxy. They believe that size and armor and numbers make them invincible. She turned to face her bridge crew, and every officer straightened under her gaze. They are wrong. The Krath think they understand what predators look like. They think they know what violence means. But they have never met a species forged on a death world. They have never fought creatures who learned to kill before they learned to speak. Her voice hardened. We are going to teach them. The fleet accelerated in the stars, stretched into lines of light, and somewhere ahead a peaceful species was dying. And the humans were coming, and they were bringing something the Krath had never experienced. They were bringing vengeance.